Hello to whoever's watching this tutorial. This is going to be a tutorial on how to spawn game objects and a few other things. We're going to make them rapidly spawn and show you to clean up a certain type of game object and stuff like that. So we're gonna, just a quick showcase. This is what it's going to be like. So when we left click, we're going to get crates spawning wherever you want spawn. You can have physics, like you can see. What we're also going to do is we're going to make it so you can clean them all up. And you can also rapidly spawn if you would like, as long as you're holding down your selected key or mouse button. So the way we're going to make it clean up, you can actually clean them up almost all at once by holding your cleanup key, or you can do it individually or by groups, the way we're going to do it. Alright, so let's get into it. What you're going to want to do first is you're going to want to make a little floor with a collision. So it's going to be a mesh collider or a box collider, whatever you want it. If you don't have this polygon prototype pack for the floor, you just want to make a game object up here, 3D object, and you can use a plane. Just throw it here, put some sort of material on it if you have one, and we'll use that. So once you get that down, put that there, and make sure it has the collider. You can do this by unchecking your mesh collider, or your mesh render, I mean, or whatever renderer you have. You can see these green lines around. You won't see it if you have the gizmos turned off, so you want gizmos turned on. Mesh colliders aren't the most performant comparatively to box colliders, because I'll show you right here. I'll re-enable this. We'll disable the mesh collider. We'll put a box collider on here. Disable the mesh renderer. Now you can see there's a line here, there. There's not very many. Whereas if we go with a mesh collider, there's way more. So mesh colliders are generally more accurate, but they have certain use cases. Like you can't use them for triggers very well unless it's convex. Once it's convex, it's basically a normal collider in a sense. But yeah, we'll get into that way later. It's very different comparing like what you're using it for. So we're just gonna use the box collider, take out that mesh renderer, in the mesh collider, and what we're gonna do first is we're also going to make our spawn point for later. So right now I have my spawn point up here. I am going to deactivate this, make a new one. We're gonna create an empty game object. Make sure it's empty. And it's gonna be named by default game object. So we can rename it by clicking here and typing, or we can right click here, rename, and rename it here. So I'm gonna make this our spawn point. So you can rename it to whatever you want, but I'm gonna make this main spawn point. What I prefer to do is I actually don't like using spaces if I'm naming something that I might refer to in the future. It makes it easier in the coding. So under that, before we're going to right click transform, reset, so the position is zeroed out. We're gonna right click 3D object. We're gonna make a sphere or whatever shape you want. I just like spheres for this. So we're gonna visualize where our spawn point is. So make sure your model is zeroed out. You do it by right click, reset. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna throw a different material on here to make it more visible. We got a red one right here. If you don't have a material, you can right click, create, make a material, it's green, and then you can make it green. Drag this on and you have your material. But we don't want green, so I'm gonna make this a little bit smaller. There's gizmos up here that you can use, little tools. You can click to change, or you can use hotkeys. If you want to change from this transform tool to the scale tool, you hit R on your keyboard. And so you can resize stuff on each axis, and it'll do it differently. As you can see, it'll kind of make it more like a cylinder. But what we want to do is we want to use this gray square. This resizes it equally on all axes. So we're going to want to make it smaller. That's probably good. All right. So now we got our little spawn point. If we double click on our main camera, it will show us where we are. I'm going to zoom in by scrolling my mouse wheel upwards. So I'm going to go back, scroll in, and I'm going to align my view with it by hitting this right here. So our viewport is now lined up with this. If you don't already have your main camera here, you can move your like editor camera wherever you want. Like if you want it to be looking from here, and then you go hit your main camera, click it, don't double click it, just click it once so it's selected. Hit, I believe it is game object, and then you're going to go to align with view, and it'll move the camera right on top where you just were, or whatever game object you had selected. Just like that. So we're also going to want our spawn point a little bit higher, probably like up here. Maybe a little bit higher. That's good. A little bit to the left. So, is this center of the platform-ish? Not really. There we go. So one thing you're going to want to do, which I actually forgot to tell you earlier, is by default, when you create a 3D object, it's going to have a collider on it. Like for example, this cube we just created has a box collider. So the sphere that we created earlier for your little visualization of where your spawn point is, we actually want to go here and remove the collider. So if we had the collider there, what would happen is when we spawn a box or whatever you want to spawn on here, it'll just kick it somewhere because it'll instantly collide with it or it'll get stuck. It'll just mess up the collision. We don't want that. So as long as you don't have a collider, your objects are just going to go straight through here. If you don't want it enabled and you want to hide it, you can just uncheck it up here. Or if you have queue hierarchy, you can use this. So now that we've got all this basic stuff out of the way, we're going to go into our scripting. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click, create a script, C# script, and we're going to call this game, or maybe just call it whatever you want to call it, but I'm going to call it spawning tutorial. And then if you double click it, it'll open up, or you can hit open right here. It should open it in your IDE of choice. Mine's Visual Studio, so we got this. So actually, I'm gonna change my layout a little bit. It's up here. There we go. All right. So now that we have our IDE open, we're gonna want to do a little bit of coding. Up at the top, we have all the stuff that we need right now. We've got system collections. These are basically our using tags. So if we're using the Unity engine namespace, we can use stuff like mono behaviors, void start, etc., etc. We can use stuff like game objects, and so on. You can also use stuff like Unity engine.ui. UI. Oh, I messed that up. But there's Unity engine.ui and stuff like that. Using Unity engine.ui. And that's how you do it. So this tutorial is going to be more of a basic tutorial for coding because this is targeted towards one of my friends. So what we're going to do initially is we're going to start off by defining some variables and stuff, but what we want to do first is kind of get an overview of what we're doing and what we want to methodically plan out what we're going to do first. So if you look here, there's the start function and the update function. Start, it's pretty self-explanatory. It says in the green commented out text right here. But what it does is it's going to call it when you start the game, basically. So when you hit start, when that first frame plays, whatever's in here is going to run, and it's going to run once, and it's going to run whenever the game object that the script is on is activated or the script is activated. That's what start does. So a lot of the times you don't even need start, so you can delete it. We don't actually really need it for what we're doing, but we're going to keep it just for, the sake of it. Just going to show you one thing that we can do with it later. Don't forget. And update, there's different types of update. There's late update, fixed update, update. Basically, the one we're going to use right now is the basic update. Update is called once per frame. It's called every frame. Update's good, but the problem with update is if you getting a variable frame rate, it's going to update different. It's going to update differently. So this also depends on your Unity project settings and your physics settings. But generally, say some people will tie fire rate or FPS games to your FPS by accident, totally on accident. They usually don't mean to do it. This can be avoided by using delta time, which we're going to use later. But yeah, if you want to learn more about that, you can. I'll explain it later in another tutorial if you guys want it. So we're going to go up to the top. We're going to hit enter a few times. So this class that we're doing, the spawning tutorial, is derived from model behavior, which is nice for what we're doing. What we're going to do is first we're going to define the game object that we're going to spawn. So you could make this public, and if you make it public, what you can do really is one of the big things I'm going to mention right now is you can call it from other scripts, which is important, and you can change the value and that stuff. That's big, but if you're doing that, it's actually better to make a variable of that or do it in a few different ways. But for something like this, we don't really need to do that yet. But we're going to do it anyways. So we're going to make it a private, and we are going to go game object. One thing I'll point out first is there's game object. I'll go in here. There's game object with lowercase, and there's game object with uppercase. Lowercase is the game object that the component is attached to, like it says right here. So it would be whatever you have this script on, the game object that the script is attached to, that's what this is referring to. So if you had this on a cube, like if you had this attached to this, it would be referencing this sphere. So let's go back here. Delete this. So we're going to make a private game object, and we're going to call it object to spawn. What we're also going to do is we're going to hit the up arrow. We are going to hit enter. We're going to hit bracket. We're going to go serialized field and close it. So one thing I accidentally did right there, which I'm going to mention right now, a lot of you guys won't run into this. If you start typing and hit insert on your keyboard, so if you hit insert on your keyboard, it'll delete shit basically. So don't do it like this. Yeah, you can kind of see now how it's highlighting. As you start typing, it's just going to replace stuff. If you want to turn that off, you hit insert. It could be useful, but honestly, you almost never use it. So now this is serialized. I'm going to show you what this actually means. So if we do a public variable, as most of you guys probably already know who are watching this tutorial, we're going to remove the old one, throw this on. It's going to show this in the inspector right here. So we could assign some sort of game object here, but it's public, so it's an exposed variable and it can be used in a bunch of different things. We don't really want that for our purposes right now. So we're gonna make it private, but we still want to see it in the inspector. So how do we do that? Well, we can serialize it. So we do serialize field, hit Control S or save at the top up here, go back to Unity, and then you go to your main camera, wherever you attached it to, spawning tutorial, and now we can see it still. But if we went back here, we removed this, saved it, went back. When we don't have that there, now it's gone. So that's just one important thing to remember if you're going to use private variables or private stuff that you want to have exposed in your editor. So now that we've got that, we also want to define, I'm going to serialize it first. We're going to define our transform. So transform, we're going to call our transform spawn point. So the transform is what we made earlier, is the empty game object. We're going to use the empty game object's position, its x, y, and z coordinates for the spawn point and where to spawn our game object. You can also use world space and coordinates to do it through code, but we're going to do it this way because it's a lot more beginner friendly. And yeah, unless you're building for a specific system, you're probably not going to use it the way that I mentioned. So now we've got the spawn point done. We are also going to go down here and we're going to define some stuff for later, just ahead of time. We're going to hit 2 forward brackets. We're going to type user input. Whenever you type 2 forward brackets, by the way, it greens it out, and this is a comment. You can also do forward bracket and then a star or an asterisk, and it'll go as long as you want. For example, hit enter a bunch of times until you do asterisks and then another forward slash or backslash, I mean. Yeah, so that can be extremely useful. So we have the user input here. At the top, we're just going to call it stuff common stuff. Down here, we're going to call it user input. We're going to get a serialized field. Oop, that was a interesting spelling mistake. Private. So here we're going to do something interesting and new that most of you guys probably haven't done before. We're going to use key codes. So when we define the key code, we need to select key code, and then we need to make a name for it. So we're going to call this key spawn key. Spawn. Oh, spawn key. And then we need to do equals. So you don't have to define it right now, but we're going to. So key code equals, and then you can do key code. It'll usually show up right here for you, so you can hit enter or just type key code dot. And then there's a bunch of different key codes down here. We already know the one we're going to use for this. We're going to use mouse 0, which is left click. If you're ever wondering what a certain key code is, you can always do this. Key code G equals key code dot. And then if you hover over it, it'll show you what it is. Or you can just go to the Unity documentation. So the next one is we're going to serialize as well. We're going to call this private key code rapid spawn key, and we're going to make this right click. So it's going to be keycode.mouse1. And other than that, the only other key we're going to need is a key to clean up stuff. So it's going to be private key code once again. We're going to call this cleanup key. And we're going to make this keycode.c. So C just is the letter C on your keyboard. That's all it is. Other than this, we are going to make some timers for spawning stuff. Serialize these two. Private. Oh, that was interesting. Private float. So floats are different than ints. I'm not going to explain the whole thing here, but floats basically you can do decimals, and ints you can't do decimals. Ints have to be whole numbers, for example. You can't just do that. It'll be like, hey, don't do that. So if you ever need to use something that's like has a decimal or a point, use floats. There's a bunch of other use cases, but I'm just going over basic stuff right now. So we're going to use float because we want to time it. and we're going to equal, let's make it a short timer before we spawn, so we're going to go for 1f. So we put f after this, private float, we're going to call this initial spawn time. So the reason we put f after this is because f makes it a constant. You don't need it, but sometimes you do, so we're just going to put it there now. So we're going to make another serialized field. This is our last one for now. Private float, repeat, spawn time equals, and let's make it 8. Repeat spawn time is exactly what it says. We're going to make it so if you hold down a button, it just keeps on respawning it every however fast you want it. So we don't need to put anything in the start yet. We're going to go down to update. So what we're going to do is we're going to check for inputs now. If we do if, I'm going to actually go back, enter if input dot get key down, spawn key, and then enter, then curly bracket, enter, and then we're basically going to define a method that we haven't made yet. It's going to be called spawn, and we're going to put in an argument inside of the brackets called object to spawn, which is what we've already defined. I didn't mean to actually name it spawn key. I wanted to name it spawn. It's just it auto-completed because we don't have it in yet. So we're going to go here now, hit enter twice. We're going to make a new void. We're going to call it void spawn. And then in here, what we're actually going to do is we're going to put an argument. So we're going to put game object, and then we're going to call the game object spawn object. So why we're doing this is because we're making it a little bit, what's the word for it? Dynamic. We want it so you can spawn different types of game objects and make it easier to change. We're not going to go into the whole thing right now and make it actually do that, but this is just so you can do in the future. It's good practice. So basically, we have to pass through, call this, and then we can spawn something. So inside of here, what we're going to do is we're going to do game object dot instantiate, which basically means create. And then what we're going to do is we're going to type in what object we want to spawn. So it's going to be spawn object because this is up here. And then we're going to put it where we want to spawn it, which is going to be our spawn point, which is our transform, which we have up here. If you ever want to go straight to stuff like that, a really handy thing to do is hold Control and click it, and it'll bring you right there. So the reason we put spawn object here, to expand upon this a little bit, is we have the game object spawn object defined here, and we want to spawn a game object. So we're spawning this spawn object, and what we're going to do is we're going to define this spawn object to be the object we want to spawn. So why this is important, and we're not just using object to spawn, is because object to spawn we need to assign through the inspector or by code, and changing it isn't as easy as if we did this, where we can just change spawn object via code, and we can just do more with it. It's more dynamic, like I said. So once we do this, we are going to make one quick thing up here. We're going to make a string. We're going to call this string delete obj, and then it's going to be called object to spawn dot name. So this is for later, but what it's doing is this is a string. A string is basically a bunch of letters or text. Delete object is what we're calling it, so del obj, we're going to delete an object. What we're doing here is we're grabbing the name of the object that we're spawning. So telling this delete object is this, and we're getting this dot name. So we're getting this and whatever this is named. So if we spawn some barrel number 27, it's gonna tell us that it's barrel number 27. So, past that, we are going to make one more void real quick. Void rapid spawn method. And then this one's going to be pretty quick. We're just going to do spawn object to spawn. So I'll explain this right now instead of later. Just going to take a drink real quick. Is because basically we're going to use an invoke later. And if you're invoking stuff, unless you want to do some hack or some weird method, you can't add arguments to invoke calls, basically. Not easily, and it's not beginner friendly to do it, so we're just not going to do it. And it's also usually not that efficient. So, we've got this. Now we're going to move on down into our update function, which is where we're going to get the meat of things. In the update, we're going to handle most of our input. So, we are going to type a few things. So this was basically right here. This is just our basic spawn. So this is our going to spawn on left clicking. After that, we're going to make another one. We're going to call this a rapid spawn. So this is going to be when we hold down right click, it's just going to continuously spawn until we let go. So if input.getKey down, rapid spawn key, which is what we defined up here, way up here. Oops, wrong one, my bad. Was not thinking straight right there. So once we get this, input.getKey down, rapid key spawn, or rapid spawn key, we've got what we want, and we need to put a few arguments in here. So this one's going to be a little bit more complex in here because it's going to do something a little bit harder. We're going to use our invoke method now. So we're going to go invoke, repeating, and then this is going to take a few arguments in here. Initially, what we're going to do is we're going to call the name of the method that we want to use. So we can't invoke repeating on the spawn method because it needs to pass through a spawn object. And we don't default the spawn object because it's not what we want to do in a certain situation. So it's just going to spawn nothing if you're using the right click and calling spawn. So what we're going to do is we're going to call object to spawn because this is just going to go through here and call this because this is spawning and we're passing through the object to spawn from up here. And this is passing this to here, and then it's going to call this. And then it's going to spawn this object to spawn here. So these brackets, we're going to put rapid spawn method. So when you're typing here, it's not going to autocomplete or autocorrect. So read carefully and make sure you don't mess this part up. Because if you do and you're new, you can get confused for a long time if you're not good at debugging. So before we defined our initial spawn times and our repeat spawn times here, we're going to use these here because we have to define first, first thing we're going to put in is the initial spawn time, and this is how long before the initial object spawns. So if we put like a really long time, it's going to take a long time to spawn, or if we put no delay, it's going to spawn instantly. We're going to put a tiny delay just because. So we've got initial spawn time, and so what I was saying earlier about the frame rate thing and how people tie their stuff to frame rate is because they don't use delta time, so we're just going to do time.delta time. And now we don't have to worry about variances in frame rate screwing with our stuff as much. And we're going to do the same thing in the second one. It's going to be our repeat rate, or sorry, repeat spawn time times time.delta time. And this one right here is just, it's going to spawn every X amount of time, and it's just going to keep on doing it until we stop it. So now that we're down here, got this done, I'm going to put a little debug right here that's going to print into the console that we press this. So pressed rapid key. Because if we're going to have any errors, it's usually going to be with this more complex stuff versus just one single call right there that we can figure out what the hell's going on. So after this, we're going to go if input dot get key up, rapid spawn key. So what we want to do now is we're going to want to cancel this invoke when we let go of the right mouse button so it doesn't just infinitely spawn whatever you're doing. This is ridiculously easy, and we're just going to use the end all BL cancel invoke, and it's just going to straight up cancel any invoke that's running in this method. Oh, accidentally zoomed out. Yeah, so cancel invoke cancels every single invoke that is going on in this method at the given time. So, other than that, all we need is cleanup, and it's going to be if input dot get key down. Actually, no, we're going to use get key. Cleanup key and destroy. Oh, we didn't actually make our destroy game object method yet. I forgot. So we're going to make one more method. Void destroy game objects. And we're going to make a string del obj equals. Actually, no, we just need to define our string. So we're going to say delete object equals our name that we're finding up here. So delete object equals object to find. Object to spawn dot name plus. So here we're going to use two little quotations, and we're going to type clone, because when you make an object multiple times, it puts clone at the end. So we're going to delete that. So we're going to add that so it deletes those two. You can just make it so, like the way we're doing it right now, it's not going to delete the initial crate that you like spawn, but that's so minuscule and you can fix that on your own that it doesn't even matter. So we're going to go destroy game object dot find delete obj. So right here what we're doing is we're destroying the object. So we're finding this, we're going game object dot find delete object. So what we're actually doing is we're finding the object by the name of delete object, because this is a string that we defined right here. So this is all what delete object is actually going to say, is basically it's going to say your object name. So whatever it is, it could be barrel 37 clone, and that's what it's going to be. So after that, all we have to do is, actually, I'm just going to show this. So we're going to debug.log. We're going to go destroy game object called destroying equals, and we're going to go spit plus delete obj to string. And now that we do that, it's going to print destroying game object called destroying and then the object name. The reason we have a space right here is because this doesn't automatically make a space before this. So if we had it right here and didn't have a space, it'd be like equals barrel instead of barrel. So we're going to go back down here, and all we're going to do is call destroy game objects. And this should be everything that we need at the moment for it to work. Looks like it's all set up properly. So now that we've got the script set up, we need to drag in our transforming game object, which we made earlier. So our object to spawn, we're going to define after our spawn point. Oops, clicked on the wrong one. So our spawn point is up here. Drag your main spawn point over here, or you can hit here, select it in the scene. And our object to spawn, you can just choose wherever you want, but I'm going to use this crate. So whatever you're spawning, actually, I'm going to show you guys how to do this. I'm not using the crate. We are going to create a game object. It's going to be a cube. I'm going to, oh, it's lagging. Then move this over here. Keep the box collider. What we're gonna, it needs is a rigid body to have physics. And we're also gonna make the collision continuous dynamic. This should be good. We're gonna call this box. Now to make a prefab, drag it into here. We're gonna delete this from the scene now. We're gonna go back to our main camera, drag this in here. This looks good. So now if we check through, everything should be there. Hit play. Okay, so I messed up something. Oh, let's double click and open our prefab. This isn't zeroed out, so right click, hit reset, or you can just go 0, 0, 0. So now if we go here, hit this. So that's when we left click. If we press C, it'll delete them. If we spam left click, it'll spawn a bunch. If we hold C, it'll delete them. And if we use right click, it'll start rapidly spawning. So congratulations on making it this far and following through the tutorial. Hopefully you join for some future tutorials. And that was all. Have an awesome day.